Hi, and welcome to the Miracle Larry podcast. I'm Dr. Jack Cush, the moderator of this great production. I'm joined by my best friend, Larry Kelly. Hey, Larry, how you today?
I'm good, Jack.
Yeah. For those of you who don't know Larry Kelly, he is also known as Miracle Larry. He is the subject of this podcast, but it's more than just Miracle Larry. It's all about the pandemic. And what we're saying is the upside of the pandemic. What do you want to get out of this podcast, Larry?
Oh my God, Jack. I'm fascinated that I've been speaking lately. I've been doing some speaking. I'm fascinated that people even listen to what comes out of my mouth. So I have no expectations for this podcast. I'm sort of excited about seeing where it goes.
Right.
But I hope it can be a little inspiring because I have learned over the years that my story and what happened to me is inspiring to people, and I like that. And we'll see what happens. But this was your idea, so
It is. It's a grand
thumbs
idea.
up or thumbs down.
Right. Well, this is the inaugural Inception episode of a weekly podcast that's dedicated to the many stories surrounding Larry's story, and really what we think is the upside of COVID. And we think that this pandemic thing changed our lives in many, many ways. So we're really going to make this about Larry and his story, but at the same time, really, when you hear Larry talk about the pandemic, he talks so much about the other stories around him, his family, his friends, the nurses, the doctors, the New York City at the time. And we think that's fodder for a great discussion. So that's what we're looking to do. So again, weekly,
we're
the upside.
We're going to have many guests too, Jack.
Yeah. Well, we're gonna, I think we have Tom Hanks in week 3, and Bridget Bardot is going to make a special appearance for us. So our mission is to inform, inspire, and bring together an audience that can relate to this Miracle Larry story, his message, his experiences, his life pivots that really have emanated from this. So, Larry, our first episode this week, what's the title? What are we going to talk about?
I think we should. I think we should introduce ourselves, Jack. I think we should let people know just who we are and how we got together. I'll do you first. I have known this man, Dr. Jack Cush, since kindergarten. We are lifelong friends. What?
62 years.
62 years. Jack, don't ever tell my age.
Oops.
On film, okay? All right.
I should have said 78 years, and then people would say, man, you guys look good.
I've known Jack since kindergarten. We used to walk, people don't realize back when we were kids, your parents took you to school the first day of kindergarten just to show you how to get there. And then it was, you're on your own the second day of school. Just see that group of kids, just follow them. So Jack and I walked to school from kindergarten every day. We went through elementary school together. We went through junior high together. We went through high school together. And, I always said that, we've known each other and another group of buddies for forever. But Jack and I, our lives inexplicably crossed in March 2020. And I think we're sort of bound for the rest of our lives in some sort of historic way. But this man has his own incredible story, which we'll probably get to in future episodes. But this is Dr. Jack Cush, and he's one of the top rheumatologists in his field. He's respected and well known, and he's brilliant in his own right, and he's my dear friend. And there you go.
Excellent. Thank you, Larry. So let me introduce Lawrence Kelly, who sat behind me in kindergarten. Our kindergarten teacher was Mrs. Deuce, and I want to be clear that I was her favorite because when it came to nap time, I slept under her desk. You were out there in the gallery.
See, but as I'm probably going to do many times, I have to correct you. Mrs. Deuce was our first grade teacher. Miss Crago was our kindergarten teacher. Just want to throw that out there. Miss Deuce was first grade.
I want to remind the audience, Larry survived COVID and was left with brain damage. So you're going to have to make up your own mind about whether who's telling the truth here. So let me move on from we got out of kindergarten, and we're pretty much in every class. Early on in the elementary years, Larry was already known as a performer, a raconteur, a guy who was a kid who was a leader. And our next seminal moment was, I believe it was, I'm going to say third grade, when you had already been acting as a child actor in local theater and whatnot, and you were known for this. You could sing, you could act, and none of us could do that. And we had our own local yearly production for third grade, and they didn't give you the lead, although you clearly deserved it because they were tired of giving you the lead. And I went for the lead and almost got it. And instead, the play was Rip Van Winkle. And what was my role? You remember these things.
Oh, I know, I remember.
Van Brummel, were you Van Brummel and I was Rip Van Winkle? No, Jimmy Gagliardi was Rip Van Winkle. I was Bo Brummel. And then, so that was like the one time I came close to competing with Larry in theater. But that's what we did in our upbringing. We competed. Our lives were sports. Our lives were being quick with our wits. Our lives were, being with a group of friends that formed us. And really we're, to this day, we're an amazing group called the Mutters, and that we're almost like 30 strong and very close to each other. And it really began back in, junior high, high school, and back in elementary school. So Larry went on, he studied theater, was in the theater, did a number of things, got his bachelor's degree and then advanced degrees to become a teacher, and later was a teacher in the New York City public school system, where he was a principal in the Bronx and
Harlem, not the Bronx.
In Harlem, sorry, and then ultimately retired, and then in his retirement came down with COVID. So we're going to get into, again, more details along the way. But Larry, give everyone your CV, your resume that you would give about your training and your upbringing, beyond your upbringing, that people get to know more about you.
Elementary school, you talked about the plays we did, and when I was 11 years old, which I believe 11 is sixth grade, the school had a Flag Day ceremony that was out, and the principal came up and asked me if I would narrate this Flag Day ceremony. I said, yeah, sure, okay. Just give me paper. I'll do what I do. But while I was doing it, this woman approached me after this Flag Day ceremony and said, what's your name? And I said, Larry. And she said, the workshop is doing a production of 1,000 Clowns. We want you to audition. So I didn't even know what it was. I had 1,000 Clowns. I don't know. Well, to make a long story short, because I could talk forever about this, I auditioned. I got the script. I read it, and I auditioned and wound up getting the part and played at 11 years old opposite Brian Dennehy, the actor, in 1,000 Clowns. And that was one of the most really pivotal moments in my life. It was such an incredible experience to work with these really incredibly talented people. And obviously, when you're 11 years old and at the end of the play, you walk out on stage and stand at the end of the stage, and the audience goes into thunderous applause when you're bowing. Okay, this is good. This is good. And I sort of, I knew then that I was going into the arts in my life. I always had a knack, Jack. It's back in Salem. the local newspaper was called the Suffolk County News, which was, everybody has their local newspaper wherever they live in the United States. For ours in Sable, it was the Suffolk County News. And I always had a knack for getting my name in the paper when I was a kid. But there was a whole article about my performance in that production of 1,000 Clowns, and the headline was like weird. When you're an 11-year-old kid, audiences marvel at lad and workshop production, and I was like, wow, that's all right. That's a little weird. But so I had a little bit of, I was sort of well known in our town because the newspaper, had my name in it every now and then. So to move on from there, I started the arts, and I went into the arts, and I left Sable. What did you want? How far did you want me to go? Because
first I want to say about Suffolk County News, we would usually look for you in that, but usually in police blotter. And little petty things that we did as kids. So, but yeah, much to our surprise, we're on page 2 or 3, in the local playhouse and whatnot. That was different. I want to ask you though, what you were, and your whole life, you were really into sports. You were very accomplished in sports. But theater's different than sports, or is it? Is it the same kind of satisfaction or feedback? Why did you end up liking it so much?
That's a great question. When you're in school, when you're in grade school, I had such a big conflict within myself because you cannot do sports and theater. There are the jocks and there are the theater geeks. And I had to, I climbed the fence on both of those cliques. And I always had to choose whether I was going to do a sport or whether I was going to sit out a season and do the play, which I loved just as much as I loved the sports. But to answer your question about whether they're similar, it is pretty amazing. A buddy of mine that we'll talk about at some point, and he'll actually be on here because he's my writing partner. We did a 2-character play for Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS, the charity, and we gave all the money that we made to Broadway Cares Equity Fights AIDS. And that play was by David Mamet. It's called Speed the Plow, and it's such a difficult play because you never have a moment to stop, and there's so many things to memorize. Mamet writes in this staccato, the ums and the ahs and those are all in the script. Everything he puts that in. It's very difficult to memorize. And Steve and I, we had to be athletes to actually do that production, because once you walk on stage, you're never off. And for an hour and a half, you got to bang this stuff out. So acting in the arts, theater is an athletic event. I mean, it's the adrenaline and the energy, which is why actors spend so much time taking care of their body, just like athletes do. Actors do too. So Jack, to answer your question, very similar. Very similar.
So then you're in the theater, you're studying theater. While you're in the theater, you meet your wife. You meet Dawn, you marry Dawn. At some point, how do you transition away from that, although it's always part of your life, into education?
Great. And let me tell you how I met Dawn. I met her at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. I had spent 1 year up at in SUNY, at SUNY Oneonta, doing theater up there, and realized that I wanted to be an actor. And I was sitting one day on this bench overlooking these gorgeous mountains upstate New York, in Oneonta, and saying, "You want to be an actor? What are you doing up here in the mountains? What are you doing up here in the mountains?" So I left Oneonta, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And it's an incredible story. It's all about the people that come into your life that you remember, that had an impact that they don't even know they had an impact, and how happenstance is so much a part of where we end up, you know. A buddy of mine, from Sable, Ronnie Eicher, lived behind us. Ronnie Eicher, he had a built-in pool. He was the only one in our high school who had a built-in pool. So he had all the parties, right? I was over there one day in the afternoon. He had these two young people. This was after I left Oneonta, not knowing what I was going to do with my life. You know, I knew I wanted to be an actor. I didn't know how to go about it at all. So at Ronnie's, they're cleaning the pool. These two people are cleaning the pool, and one's a very attractive. They're both attractive young people, and they just started a conversation with me, and they said, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, I'd like to be an actor. I don't really know what I'm doing." She goes, "Why don't you go to the school I went to?" I said, "What was that?" She goes, "The American Academy of Dramatic Arts." And I had never heard of it. It's like, I never heard of it. She says, "Well, you can send away for the catalog." Those days, it wasn't the computers and stuff. There was no internet. You did everything by snail mail, you know. And so I found out about the American Academy of Dramatic Arts through this young lady who had just graduated, who was cleaning Ronnie Eicher's pool. Not a glowing endorsement for the school, by the way, but that's how I auditioned for the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. I found out about it. I was given a Catholic Actors Guild scholarship, so the whole school was paid for by this scholarship, and it was presented to me at a luncheon, which was another great story, by the actor Cyril Richard. There was this whole luncheon for the Actors Guild. St. Malachi's Church in Midtown is the act. All their meetings and stuff, and Cyril Richard played Captain Hook in the Peter Pan movie with Mary Martin. So that's Cyril Richard. Very, I was like this young, 18 years old, and sitting there, and our recipient of our award is, anyway. So I went to the American Academy, and Dawn was there. How I met Dawn, I didn't know about her. She knew about me, and she tells the story, and she'll come on here and tell it. It'll probably be different than how I'm telling it, but she tells the story that the Academy used to give us free tickets for Broadway shows, and we were at a show called The National Health. It was a British comedy about their national health system, and Dawn, how she tells it, she saw me we sat in the mezzanine. She saw me in the mezzanine. She says I was holding court, whatever that means. I'm assuming it meant I was telling a story and people were listening. I don't know, but she said she looked at me across the room. That's what she says. We'll bring her on at some point to verify this. And she said she told her friends, see that guy over there? That's the man I'm going to marry. And then she tells that story. Never met me. Now, we did meet that Halloween. There was a Halloween party, and she was dressed as Bonnie Parker of Bonnie and Clyde. And my roommate was this tall, really good-looking, Midwestern guy, blonde, blue-eyed. And he went as Joe Buck, and I went as Ratso Rizzo from Midnight Cowboy. I had my teeth blacked out, my hair. I was dirty. I was and that's how I met Dawn. So she fell in love with Ratso Rizzo, and hasn't much changed that much over the years. So I met Dawn at the American Academy of Dramatic Arts.
So she stopped calling you Ratso, and and you both went into education.
Well. That's a long time later, Jack. I mean, there's a decade in there we haven't talked about.
Well, we can go faster through that decade and get into teaching.
We had successes in the New York theater. Dawn was working, I was working. I wasn't getting a lot of work. We both had to supplement. We had so many different jobs. One of my big jobs was in the restaurant business. Of course, I was a bartender, then rose up to be general manager of the cabaret club. But everybody, in the 70s and 80s in New York, everybody who worked in a restaurant was an artist of some sort. They were doing something else. No one was actually in the restaurant business. So I we were doing that. I wrote a play. My biggest success in the theater, I wrote a play that played off Broadway in 1986, and it played 5 cities after that. We had thought, I had read Moss Hart's Act One, and in Act One, when Moss Hart combined with George Kaufman to write, I forgot what, either You Can't Take It With You or The Man Who Came to Dinner, one of them. Right after he wrote it and went on Broadway, he moved to Park Avenue. So of course, Dawn and I thought we were moving to Park Avenue right after this. That's the way it happened. And it didn't happen that way. So we had, the play made me a grand total of like $35,000, which supposedly is pretty good. But it wasn't enough to live on. And the play took 4 years of my life, a year and a half to write and 4 years to get it produced. After 9 years of marriage, we decided to start a family. And Dawn was 8 months pregnant. The play had run its course. I had spent all the money. There was no money coming in. Dawn was 8 months pregnant, so she lost her job. There was no money coming in. And we remember this day. Dawn and I always remember this day. We were living in a 1-bedroom apartment on 78th Street. And we were staring at a brick wall, sitting on a couch. She's 8 months pregnant. The bill collectors are calling. And she says, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? What are we going to do? And I kept looking at her and saying, well, I don't know. I gave it my shot. You got any ideas? She said, what are we going to do? We stared at a brick wall, Jack, for 2 hours. And we remember this day because it was the day we both left the theater. And I just turned to her after 2 hours and said, we have to go back to school. And we went back to school. And that's how we went into education. And it was a great job for both of us. I was an English teacher. I started out as an English and drama teacher. So the city, I thought it was the greatest job in the world. The city was paying me to stand in front of a classroom of listeners and talk about great works of literature. Got a better job than that. Right. So anyway, that's how we went into education, and loved every minute of it. 25 years.
So getting into this Miracle Larry story, which is going to be a real eye-opener for most people. It's going to be a shock. It's going to be really amazing. I want to know, though, many people think that your future defines you. The things that happen to you define you. I kind of believe that it's your history that defines how you'll respond in the future. So what do you think about, in your background made you tough enough to survive COVID? Like, what happened? Was it, not getting the lead for Rip Van Winkle that gave you, the fight? Was it your wrestling career and, bridging to avoid a pin that gave you the fight? Where did you get this toughness to survive?
Well, that's Jack. That's not a simple question.
No, I know.
That's not a simple.
But your history is vitally important here if they're to understand how could this guy live through this.
As well as I do. There's Larry Kelly that and then this persona happened in spring of 2020, where this Miracle Larry was created. I don't know what else to say, but Larry Kelly became Miracle Larry. And I'm still, and this podcast is wonderful for that, because it's going to help me answer questions that I have of who is Miracle Larry and how did that all come about. In terms of strength, Jack, that that's something we're going to get into when we really delve into what happened to me. I will say just briefly that everything that happens in your life um, um, adds to building your strength. I will say this though, I was consistent with myself when I was going through what I went through. I was honest with myself that I was trying to live, but all the crap that came out of my mouth when I was growing up about life and about, I tried to, okay, now you have to prove this. And to give an example, it always bothered me the way Hollywood portrayed the end of the line. From Brian's song, Brian's song was a big movie when we were kids, had a huge impression on me. The bed scene, with James Caan lying there and, with Billy D. Williams and going quietly. I've always loved the Dylan Thomas poem. Do not go gently into that good night. It used to bother me with Hollywood because I would say, isn't anybody angry that they're dying? Isn't anybody like pissed? Every Hollywood movie, everybody's going, yes, it's time to go. It's time to go. And I understand that. But in my mind, I was like, I don't want to go. I don't want to go anywhere. So I'd always tell friends, I'd say, I wish there was a movie that just showed somebody pissed off that they were dying. And there was one movie that touched on that, and it was Mystic River with Sean Penn when his daughter is murdered in the park. And he goes, it was so different than any other scene in a movie when he goes to the park and it takes 5 guys to hold him back in his anger of his daughter in the park. Because usually people they get sad, but this was a different scene. And so I thought about that later, but strength, I just didn't want to die.
Yeah. Well, I think first off, as I'm a doctor, I've seen a lot of people die. I've seen a lot of people go through that final stages of life, and it's never like Hollywood. It's very individual. It's very painful, either for the person who's stricken or for the family that's affected, and also for the people who are caring for them. It's a tremendous emotional burden for everyone who goes through that. So I think you're right. And you wonder what their stories are that brought them to that point. Let me
I think we're going to touch on that.
Yeah. I'm gonna introduce myself to the audience because I'm going to be the guy that's sort of guiding the podcast, but I'm also a physician. And after high school, I went to college, St. John's. I wanted to go into medicine because everybody in my family sort of died young. My parents both had cancer and died when I was very young. And I think that was why I thought I could probably, go do something in medicine. And, I went to medical school in Grenada and St. George's University, and I did my residency in New York City at Coney Island. And I went to Dallas to become a rheumatologist, where I thought I'd just hang a shingle. And I ended up with an academic career doing research and teaching and really having my cake and eating it too. So, I'm good at what I've done and what I do. I work hard at that. I love, just like you love performing, I love teaching, instructing, sharing. It's when you can give and share in what you do and what I do, man, it's a good day, is it not? Right? Yeah. So I want to ask you, in your 20s and 30s, who were the 2 or 3 people that you met that defined you, that really influenced you, and who you later became? Let me tell you mine while you think of yours.
Very easy questions you're throwing.
Yeah, well, I'll tell you mine. You think of yours. Mine are, number one, guy you met, Charlie Modica, the chancellor of the St. George's Medical School. A charismatic, unbelievable man. My second one is probably Dr. Sander Friedman, who was my chief of medicine in New York. And then later, Dr. Peter Lipsky. 3 men I have to put in there probably one of my coaches, Dr. Gerald Odom, not Dr. Gerald Odom, famous Florida football coach. All three father figures. And I didn't have a father. All three strong mentors. All four, unbelievable in the way that they pushed me to do something better than I thought that I could do. Clearly, you must have people like that in your life.
In terms of people that had an impact on the trajectory of my life, there are several. One in particular, when I decided to go back to college. Now, remember, I'm not 18 years old at this point. I'm in my mid-20s, and I'm deciding to go back, or even 26, 27. Now I have a child, and I have to work and go to school. So I applied to Hunter College in New York City. When I went the first day to sign up for classes, in those days, nothing was computers. Remember, there were no computers. You had to stand online at each table for each class for like hours. And then when you got to the front of the table, the class is sold out. I went home on that very first day at Hunter. I was there like 8 hours. I have a job that I have to get. I went home. Literally, I was crying at dawn. I'm going, I can't go back to school. I don't know how I'm going to go back to school. I have no idea how I'm going to go back to school. And it turns out a buddy of mine was the admissions director at Dowling College out by us in Oakdale. I called up Stephen, and he said, Steve, I don't know how to go back to school. I said, how does anybody do this when they're this age and make a living and try and survive? He said, well, come to Dowling. He said, I live in New York City. He said, yeah, so come to Dowling. He said, well, I'll set up your schedule. I'll set up your whole schedule. I'd love to have you here at Dowling. And so this man, Stephen Darby, made it so easy for me to go back as an adult, which made me realize, there's a different aspect of adult education than there is for kids coming out of high school. There's that there has to be accommodations that are made, for adults that have to make a living while they're going to school. And Stephen made it so easy for me that I look at him as somebody who had such an impact on my life and didn't even know it. There are others. My writing partner today is one of my best friends, and he owned the hottest cabaret club in New York City for years. Steve McGraw. His name's Steve McGraw. He'll be on the show at some point. He always believed in me, and I joke with him that we're devoted to each other. He actually we call ourselves one-hit wonders. So because he has an incredible story too, and he wrote a book that was made into a screenplay that was made into a movie, a TV movie. But Steve always, we always connected, and he made me his general manager. And I joked with him. I said, Steve, I'm so devoted to you. I said, you fed my family for 9 years. Just having your business put food on my family's table for 9 years. How do you forget something like that, right? Anyway, so like Charlie Mordecai, who made you a doctor, Steve just helped me survive in New York City.
Tell one story from working at the cabaret that you want to tell the audience.
Oh, there's so many. Steve and I always talk about this. It was the most incredible night ever. We used to go a little late. So there was this thing
in New York. That means what?
After hours.
Should be
hours.
It should be 4 a.m. Okay, good. We're not really quoting that time, but go ahead.
We did close the door, but and we turned out the lights. But
right.
Okay. So, but they had there was a thing that was happening in New York called Night of 100 Stars. It was at Radio City Music Hall, and it was Night of 100 Stars, exactly what it was. This big gala that they had. I don't know what they were raising money for, but every star was there. Well, there was a place in the neighborhood called Cafe Central, and everybody knew each other. There's this whole bartender manager mafia in the Upper West Side in those days. Everybody knew each other, and you would go to each other's place and spend money because we all made money for each other. So this night we get a phone call because we had a little stage upstairs at Steve McGraw's that they were coming over from after Night of 100 Stars to come to our place. They wanted some place to go after this gala at Radio City. So Jack, I'm working the room. It's me, Steve, and one other guy because it was after 4:00, right? That room sat 65 people, and every star in that room was bigger. Everyone that walked in the door was a bigger star than the one that walked in behind them. Every seat was filled with, I'm serving, bourbon Manhattans to Elizabeth Taylor, who's saying, "Thank you, Larry." Robin Williams goes on stage and does 45 minutes off the top of his head. Cher goes up and sings 3 or 4 songs. Liza goes up and sings 3 or 4. And Steve and I talk about this. Like, the only ones there are me, Steve, and I think a friend of ours, Janet Taylor, worked that night, and an old buddy, an old Vietnam vet buddy. I'm still friends with him, Jonathan Polanski. The 4 of us were working this room, and it was crazy. But that was a night will never. So people always put on Facebook, who's the most famous person you met? I can't answer that question because there's so many famous people in the course of my 60 somewhat years that we've met and actually broke bread with. And so it's that was an incredible night. And it was just and Elizabeth Taylor was walking into this cabaret club, furs on and bejeweled and all that stuff. It's like, she liked Jack Daniels. Anyway,
well, so at that point in my life, my major claim to fame was having met Ed Kranepool. So, and the audience doesn't want to know who he is. So
it's a biggie. Yes, they do. Yes, they know who he is. Our audience is going to know who he is. We've got an old audience.
First baseman for the New York Mets. All right. We've come to the end of the podcast. I want to let the audience know that you can find this podcast on your favorite podcast channel. We're going to publish this every Thursday morning. And you can look for it on your podcast channel, whether that's iTunes, Apple CarPlay, Spotify, Stitcher, Google, podcasts, whatever.
What do they search, Jack? What do they search? Just Miracle Larry?
Search for Miracle Larry, and that's what they'll find. And you'll probably see the logo that's behind Larry's head. That will be the logo that you'll see and you can recognize. You can find links that can go right to the podcast on social media channels, whether that's Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. And you can also listen to the Miracle Larry podcast on the miraclelarry.com website that Larry and Steve have set up. And then we have a YouTube channel where you can actually watch this video of us talking to each other as we're doing here today. So please go there, subscribe. Please go there and give us a 5-star rating. Those giving us a 5-star rating, Larry, what can we do for them? How can we, stack the deck?
We're going to make T-shirts.
You'll get T-shirts. It'll be a 5-star Miracle Larry T-shirt.
I heart Miracle Larry.
Fabulous marketing idea. Next week on the podcast and the week after, we're going to get right into the Miracle Larry story. And you're going to hear my podcast sort of as a prelude to Larry coming to Dallas to give a big lecture at a medical conference that we also made into the other video cast. And you'll hear that 2 weeks from now. So you'll hear a podcast where I'm introducing the Miracle Larry story and what I went through in watching him while he was in the ICU and about to die. And then he'll get on and tell his story the week after. And then we're going to give a little commentary on that. So tune in the next 2 weeks to get some of the details on this story. Larry, this is fun.
Jack,
Okay.
good luck, baby. Good to see you.
All right. We'll do it again. Tune in. Bye-bye.